Hello my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 full party building guide for Honor Mode, where I take 4 powerful and synergistic builds, all of which I've done full guides for, so you can check them out in more detail in the individual videos, and weld them into a powerful and synergistic whole. Today, we're focusing on damage. If you've ever thought, why would I want to lock down enemies or try to control them or manipulate the battlefield if I could just render them dead, then this is the party for you. After all, in this game, dead is the strongest crowd control condition you can apply. An enemy cannot do anything if they have been slain, and so if we can just maximize our damage, we will never have to deal with whatever horrific abilities the bosses have in store for us, because they will be dead before they can do them. This party is designed to overwhelm the enemies with high numbers of attacks, high accuracy of attacks, and high damage of attacks to bring their hit points from full to 0 as quickly and efficiently as possible. We also will minimize long resting to a certain extent because of the builds that we're using, and this party will be designed in general to be powerful and functional and to get enemies dead as soon as you can. Now, I do want to be clear that what we are doing is not building the theoretically highest damage in a round. In the late game, this party will easily clear 1,000 damage in the opening round of combat, but you could certainly do higher with exploits, but I'm not building with exploits. This is intended to be a functional and honorable build for Honor Mode, so we're using the game mechanics as intended. And this party build will not require you to make any specific story choices. No items will overlap between characters, so it will be an extremely functional build for actual play in Honor Mode, which is the goal of these videos. Before I begin, I do want to take a moment to say thank you so much to Josh Hobbs for the $10 donation and the consistent support, Jobot Go for the $20 donation, Jamerson McGradner for the $10, as well as Ermenarek and Rajafon for becoming channel members. Thank you so much, my friends. I really do appreciate the support, and definitely let me know if I've mispronounced any of your names. Alright, let's get in and start building this party and maximizing our damage. The first character that we're going to be building is a monk, because if you're going for damage in Baldur's Gate 3, I think a monk is the place to start. Thanks to the incredible power and consistency of the Tavern Brawler feat, and the fact that monks make the best use of that feat in the game, monks are some of the most consistent damage, as well as the highest available damage in the game. As well, they have excellent sustained damage, so while this character will be bringing 300 or even higher burst damage in the late game, you also will have incredible sustained damage every round of combat thereafter. Most of our combats will not go past the first or second round, but in case an enemy survives thanks to bad dice rolls or circumstances beyond your control, you do want to have some sustained damage available, and this character can add that into your party. We also have Stunning Strike, as well as the control from Open Hand Monk, which means that we'll be able to lock down any enemies that do happen to survive, though mostly this character is here to do a massive amount of damage. Monks are very powerful, but do require some specific items and benefit a lot from specific party setups and support from their party. So when I want to build this character first, because we're going to be building the rest of our party in part around enabling this character to maximize its abilities and bring the most possible damage to bear that we can out of this character and the party as a whole. I recommend using Karlach if you're using an origin character, because her soul coins increase this character's damage even further. And we're using Astarion most likely for another build if you're using an origin character for that as well. But if you're doing this as a custom character, then the two races that really stand out for monk builds in general are Duergar or Wood Elf or Half Wood Elf. Duergar gives you invisibility and enlarge, which are very synergistic for this build, and Wood Elf gives you the additional movement speed, which stacks one of Monk's advantages even higher. In general, in Baldur's Gate 3, it's better to specialize than it is to generalize, and Monk getting even more movement speed, as well as being able to move many times per round, means that we can double down on one of our strengths and be even better at assassinating key targets, no matter where they are on the battlefield. This character will be used to eliminate whatever enemy we think is most threatening, even if they've survived our initial round of combat, because this character can both act reactively and proactively depending on the situation, thanks to our incredible mobility and the incredible amount of damage we bring to bear. This character is so reliable as well that you can always count on them to take out an enemy, even if the rest of your party hasn't managed to. We're going to start with Monk, so while we will be multi-classing with Rogue, we're going to take our Monk levels first. We'll get skills from another character, so we don't really need them on this character. And one of the great things about this character is that it is extremely powerful right from the beginning of the game, so can carry us through the early game when some of our other builds need a couple levels to come online. We're going to hit consistent power spikes on this character basically throughout the entire game, so it will always be at maximum strength relative to the threats that you're encountering. This will be our Elixir user, so we are dumping strength entirely, and we are going to use Elixirs of Hill Giant Strength, and in the late game, Cloud Giant Strength to maximize our strength. This is the only character in the party that requires Elixirs, so even if you find them a little bit annoying to use, then this is the only one that needs them. You just have to buy a bunch in Act 1, and remember to drink one every morning. There's two ways that you can build this character's stat split, although they're not that different, but basically we will always be dumping Charisma to the minimum, and we will always be taking 15 in Constitution, and then we are either going to take 16 in Wisdom, and then we're either going to take 16 or 17 Dexterity, depending on whether we intend to use Ethel's hair in this playthrough. If you are using it, this is the character to give it to. It's the one that benefits most from the hair, so you would take 17 Dexterity. And if you aren't, then you just take 16 Dexterity and put the remaining 2 points somewhere else. I recommend putting them into Intelligence because there's a couple Intelligence saving throws in the game, but honestly, it doesn't really matter where you spend those last 2 points. I'm going to assume that you're not doing that because, like I said, we're not requiring any specific story choices, so we're just going to put them in Intelligence for now, but if you're getting Ethel's hair, this is the character for it. The only skill you need to take is to take Athletics on this character, since we'll have extremely high strength thanks to the Elixirs, and that will enable us to push enemies in case we want to reposition them, although typically you're just going to be killing them instead of that, and you have other ways to reposition enemies. That's level 1. Let's go to level 2. At level 2, we are continuing to level up in Monk, getting all of our great Monk features, but no decisions to make. And then at Monk level 3, we get to pick our subclass, and it will come as no surprise that we're taking the Way of the Open Hand. Topple is incredibly powerful crowd control, so again, any enemies that might happen to survive our burst damage, we do have crowd control options, just sort of incidentally, from this character as well as from a couple of our other characters, so we're not totally neglecting control in favor of damage, but obviously we're leaning more towards damage. Way of the Open Hand is the damage-oriented monk, so that's the one that we're taking. At Monk level 4, we get access to our first feat, and the feat that we are going to take is, of course, going to be Tavern Brawler. Tavern Brawler is broken in many, many ways, and this is why we want to use Elixirs, because we will have 20 strength, starting, or 21 strength, but it's the same as 20, starting very early in the game, and that will enable Tavern Brawler to be giving us plus 10 to our attacks and to our damage. This means that this character at this level, which is doing 3 attacks per round, thanks to Monk's Flurry of Blows, is already getting plus 30 damage from Tavern Brawler, and almost never misses, thanks to the incredible power of your, thanks to the incredible power of the attack bonus that you get from Tavern Brawler. We also get to even out our Constitution to maximize our hit points, which is why we took 15 Constitution rather than 15 Wisdom, and so now we get an excellent stat split that it's going to look like 20, 16, 16, 16, 10, 16, or we'll still have the 17 depending on whether we've gotten Ethel's hair by this level or not. Probably you won't be doing that fight until level 5 if that's your intention, but then you'd be able to put your Dexterity up to 18 at that point and have excellent initiative and armor class as well. Other than that, no major decisions to make, so we are moving on to Monk level 5, getting extra attack as well as Stunning Strike. Stunning Strike is, of course, incredibly powerful, and we can now make 2 attempts at a stun every single round of combat as long as we have key points. This means that any enemy that we want to lock down or that we don't have the damage to take out immediately, we can almost certainly stun or topple or knock off a cliff, or regardless, there are ways to deal with it with this character, and so you'll be able to lock down any enemies that happen to survive. As well, of course, extra attack means we're now doing 4 attacks per round, so Tavern Brawler is adding plus 20 damage per round. I think I misspoke, actually, and said sorry, it's adding plus 40 damage per round, because I misspoke earlier. And so that is going to be an incredible amount of additional damage, as well as, again, you will basically never miss on this character, especially because if you really need advantage on your attacks, you can always topple an enemy. This character is also excellent for triggering sneak attack from one of our other characters, by the way, because of our incredible mobility, so that's just a piece of synergy that comes up, which we now get thanks to our additional key points and the fast movement that we've been getting as we level up. It's also worth noting that if you are playing Karlach, don't forget the smites. They do cost you a bonus action, but you aren't using your concentration on anything else, so on turns where you aren't going to Flurry of Blows, you can use the racial Zariel Tiefling smites for some additional damage. At monk level 6, we get Way of the Open Hands manifestations, and you absolutely have to remember to open your character's passives tab and turn one of these on. They're all off by default, but they do an incredible amount of additional damage, thanks to our very high wisdom as well. You could increase your wisdom to 17 instead of your dexterity, go up to 18 wisdom instead of dexterity. I like having the additional initiative and armor class, but if you really want to squeeze every drop of damage out of this character, the additional wisdom will be even more damage thanks to manifestation, as well as the boots of uninhibited Kushigo, which of course are what we're going to be using. So you can add 2 damage to every attack if you spend Ethel's Hair on Wisdom instead of Dex, but overall I think that this character wants initiative more than it wants just slightly more damage, because we do plenty of damage to kill everything, and so having high initiative, especially at this stage in the game, will allow us to make sure that enemies never get a turn. We also get to go even faster, so we can always be where we need to be. And we get the extremely broken wholeness of body action, which gives you an additional bonus action. So now we can make up to 6 attacks per round without haste or anything, which enables Tavern Brawler to be doing 60 damage, plus the actual dice of our weapon attacks and any other additional damage that we've gotten, plus we're doing the additional damage from our manifestations. At this point, your monk should be hitting for somewhere in the neighborhood of 120 damage per round, depending on exactly what items that you have, and so you're already one-shotting basically every enemy at this level with just this character's actions alone. But of course we have 4 entire characters. But it gets even better for us, because at this level we've gotten most of the things that we wanted from Monk, and so we can power up this character even further with some Rogue levels. Rogue level 1 doesn't do much for us. Sneak attack is not terribly useful, but we do get to grab expertise in a couple skills. I'm going to recommend taking expertise in athletics, because that will enable you to always shove every enemy that you are shoving. We'll already have a sleight of hand and stealth user, but you can take stealth on this character as well, and this character will benefit from any casts of greater invisibility that you might have in addition to the other character that will be primarily your stealth user. The second expertise doesn't matter that much, but perception is probably your best bet, so that's what I would go with overall, is to take athletics and perception, because that will guarantee that you will always see things. Thanks to this character's high wisdom, it's an excellent perception user, and Rogue enables you to take that on this character as well. Though we will have another character that gets perception in its native kit, but it never hurts to have more chances at finding those traps. At Rogue level 2, we get the Cunning Action, Hide, Dash, and Disengage, and this means that we can now move many times per round, thanks to our additional bonus action from Wholeness of Body. We can cover a massive distance, so no enemies will ever be safe. And of course, we can always use Step of the Wind for a key point if we need the jump, and our jump distance will be incredible thanks to the Monk bonus jump distance, as well as our just very high strength from the elixirs. So you will never have an enemy be out of reach. If they are out of reach, then something has gone wrong with how you started that fight, but it's extremely unlikely to happen. And then at Rogue level 3, we get to take our Third, we get to take the Thief subclass, giving us an additional bonus action, taking our number of attacks per round from 6 to 8, because we can now make another flurry of blows in a given round. Or in a turn where we aren't using key points, we can still make at least 4 attacks per round, which is an incredible amount of additional damage. This character is going to be attacking more than any other character, hitting more accurately than any other character, even without spending resources. And when you do spend resources, the amount of damage that you output is insane. However, we can still get even better than that because we get to continue to level up and go back to Monk. One of the great things about using elixirs is that we don't ever need to level up our attributes. We're fine having 16 and 16. We'll have reasonable armor class with whatever weapons and armor we find most appropriate, so we will not have to worry too much about armor class, but mostly you're going to be using your mobility to stay away from enemy damage. But because we don't have to level up our attributes at all in order to be maximally effective, we get to take up to a 9-3 split instead of an 8-4 split, since we don't need the third feat at all, which is going to enable us to use key resonation on this character, which is, of course, incredibly powerful. Level 7 Monk doesn't give us a lot other than evasion, but you usually won't be taking a spell because enemies are going to never get a turn. But level 8 Monk lets us take a feat, and the feat that we are going to take is going to be Alert. Since we don't need to level up our stats at all, Alert is the best possible feat for this character for Honor Mode. Honestly, you could even consider delaying the Rogue levels to take your Monk levels earlier to get Alert sooner. Because this character only has +3 initiative for the early game, you will want to find some initiative gear for them if you can. But Alert will solve that problem completely, giving you a +8 to your initiative rolls, or +9 if you're using Ethel's Hair on this character's dexterity, and that's going to be enough to go first in almost every combat. As well, of course, enemies are typically going to be starting their combats surprised, so this character will never have to actually win initiative most of the time, but winning initiative is, of course, always great on Honor Mode, so we're going to take Alert for sure. This character also just gets to use the 2 best feats in the game, Tavern, Brawler, and Alert, which is one of the great things about it. And then finally, at level 9, we get access to Key Resonation, giving us a ton of AoE damage and increasing our damage even further on this character. You have some of the highest possible damage output in the game at this point, which will basically always hit thanks to your incredibly high bonus to hit from Tavern Brawler, as well as any other magical effects you've gotten that increase your chance to hit, but most of those are going to go on other characters because this character will basically never miss as soon as you get access to Tavern Brawler and Strength Elixirs, and at this stage in the game you should have Cloud Giant Elixirs, so you should be having 26 effective strength for a +8 strength bonus, which means that with your 8 attacks per round, Tavern Brawler is giving you, what's that, plus 128 damage per round from Tavern Brawler alone before you factor in any of your other damage. That's it for this character build, but we will briefly talk about items. This character only requires 2 specific items, and those are Strength Elixirs and the Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo, which I seem to have... Oh, here we go. Misplaced slightly. Any other items you get that increase your damage on unarmed strikes, of course, are excellent for this character. And one thing that you can use with this character is Radiant Orb gear as well, because you will have the radiant damage from your passive. So with Manifestation of Soul, you can place Radiant Orb damage on this character, and then any boss that you aren't able to stun and aren't able to kill in one round, you can stack Radiant Orbs on. Honestly, this party build does not really need to abuse Radiant Orbs because enemies will almost never get a turn, but the fact that it's an option means you can power up this character even further with that gear. But really all we're doing is using the Boots of Uninhibited Kushigo for even more damage, and Strength Elixirs to maximize our strength. Between those things, we should easily be hitting 300 damage per round without spending too many resources, and peaking in the 400 range depending on exactly what enemies we're facing and whether we are expending resources like haste or speed potions and stuff like that in a given combat. Alright, that's our first build. Let's move on to the second character. For character number 2, we're going to go with a Fire Sorcerer. This gives us a lot of the utility that this party would otherwise be missing, so we're not giving up on most of the utility in the game, as well as, of course, providing a ton of additional damage, including area of effect damage, and since this party mostly specializes in single target damage, it's really nice to have a character that can clear out a large number of low health enemies with a fireball, or especially with a Wall of Fire. There's some encounters that Wall of Fire is incredibly good in, and this character's the best character in the game at using Wall of Fire, so we definitely want to do that. And also this gives us the abusive option of using metamagic with scrolls, giving us access to basically every spell in the entire game, sometimes multiple times per turn. So you're not really giving up on any of the utility of a spellcaster, because we have, even though we're taking a sorcerer, which normally has a relatively restricted spell list, because sorcerers can just use every scroll in the game, you can effectively expand your spell list to meet any scenario. This way we get to have an incredibly high damage character that will enable us to blow up large groups of enemies while our other characters take care of single enemies, while also adding a bunch of utility into this party in case we happen to need it. Again, this party will not typically need too many utility spells, but there are some that we definitely want, and so grabbing a sorcerer gives us access to those. For our sorcerer, of course, we're going for a fire damage sorcerer because it's the highest damage of the sorcerer variants, and again, in combination with the other characters in this party, will enable us to just completely one-shot most bosses in the game. And because we have so much damage on the other party members, even if we face an enemy that's immune to fire, we won't have to worry about that because we just have so many redundant sources of damage. Redundant in the good sense, in the sense of engineering for redundancy, because we just want to have overlapping sources of damage so we're never missing it no matter the circumstance. We're going to take Draconic Bloodline Sorcerer, because that's of course how we maximize our fire damage, and this also gives us Draconic Resilience, so we can operate very effectively with no gear, and this character will typically want to be using some of the better robes in the game, so while the monk is using the monk clothing or other unarmed clothing, this character gets to use the magic robes that are also very powerful, so we split those items in between our two unarmored characters, giving us access to a bunch of additional powerful items in the game. For our Draconic Bloodline, for our Draconic Ancestor, we can take either gold or fire, but given that this is going to be our party face, I recommend taking gold, because this will allow you to use Disguise Self, which is incredibly useful for being a party face for your party. And one of the points of taking a Sorcerer is you get to have very high charisma, and so can access the excellent dialogue skills, which are very useful for every playthrough. For our cantrip selection, we're going to go with Firebolt, because this is a fire sorcerer, of course, Minor Illusion, and Light, because we will not be getting light on another character, and so you definitely do want to have a light source. And then finally we're going to go with Friends. One thing that we are giving up here is access to Ray of Frost, but honestly I don't think that we're going to need it. Ice surfaces will not play a huge role in this party's playstyle, because you will just kill enemies rather than try to knock them over. But if you feel like you don't want to use Friends because you find leaving the area after casting it annoying, or you don't want to try to remember not to use it on honor mode, then without leaving the area, then you can just grab Ray of Frost, and that'll be excellent utility as well. For our spell selection at this early level, we are of course going to grab Chromatic Orb, because this gives us the most flexible damage, and shield, because shield is just excellent for every character. You definitely want the defenses of shield available. And then for our ability scores, we are going to take a relatively greedy attribute split. Since this is going to be our party face, I definitely want to get 17 charisma in, because this gets us the opportunity to take actor as a feat, and then we want to grab 16 constitution so we can maintain concentration, as well as 10 wisdom and 14 dexterity. This maximizes our stats for the most part, while giving us the flexibility to take actor as a feat and get expertise in deception as well as performance. With our Skill selection, of course, therefore we want to avoid taking deception or performance with our skills, and you would want to choose a character with a background that isn't the entertainer background, because this is redundant with performance, and then we're going to go ahead and grab the remaining dialogue skills as our remaining 2 skills, so that we have access to every skill in the game. This gives us an excellent party face, who will also be able to contribute massively to our damage as well. At level 2, we get to take our metamagic, and of course we're going to take the standard metamagic feats of Twinned and Distant Spell, as well as, for our spell selection here, Magic Missile. It's very important to have this in every party, and one of the great things about playing a Sorcerer is that we then get to access this spell. At Sorcerer level 3, we get Quicken Spell, giving us access to bonus action casts of our most powerful spells. And at spell level 2, even though this is a Fire Sorcerer, we are not yet going to select Scorching Ray. We don't have the Draconic Sorcerer feature that boosts our damage, and so for single target damage, Cloud of Daggers is actually still better than Scorching Ray at this level. As well, we just really want AoE damage with this character, and so we definitely want to take Cloud of Daggers on this character, because that's one thing that our party is currently missing at this point, so we're going to maximize our AoE damage potential by taking Cloud of Daggers. We'll grab Scorching Ray later on when we get the feature that increases our fire damage. At Sorcerer level 4, we get a feat, and the feat that we are going to take is Octor, giving us expertise in deception and performance, so now our dialogue skills are excellent, and it evens out our charisma as well. And then for our cantrip selection here, you can grab Ray of Frost, or since we're going into Act 2 at some point after this, and there will be a bunch of undead enemies, you can pick up Bone Chill. Disadvantage on attack rolls is very powerful against certain undead enemies, although, again, it's much less important to like debuff enemies in this party, because the goal is just to kill them, so you will often still prefer to just use Firebolt rather than use Bone Chill in that kind of circumstance. But being able to freeze surfaces is still excellent, so I'm going to recommend taking Ray of Frost here. And if you feel like you want Dancing Lights, you can take that, but we've already got Light, and I think I typically prefer Light to Dancing Light for lighting things. You can use Dancing Lights to block vents, which is very useful, but Light is just sort of a nice passive benefit, and you don't have to think about it. It doesn't take your concentration in fights and so on, so it'll be useful just throughout the game. For our spell selection here, we're going to take Misty Step, because of course every character needs access to Misty Step, if possible, and this character actually gets it natively, which is really excellent. And then at Sorcerer level 5, we get to take our leveled up spell, and this gives us access to Counterspell. This is one of the utility spells that we definitely want to have in our party somewhere, and so grabbing Counterspell is incredibly important, and something that will really help with this party's ability to react to threats. If you happen to lose initiative, having Counterspell is incredibly strong, and so grabbing access to it from this character will give us a lot of additional options to prevent enemies from doing things. We don't need to replace a spell, although you could if you're finding that you're not using Chromatic Orb at this point. You could replace it with Fireball, for example, but for the most part you won't necessarily need to do that until character level 6, when we get Elemental Affinity. Now we've got the additional Charisma modifier to damage, so we want to spec more heavily into fire spells. We're going to go back and grab Scorching Ray. The gimmick here is that each Scorching Ray counts individually for our charisma, so we're adding our charisma to every instance of Scorching Ray, which, as we increase our charisma throughout the game, is going to be a lot of additional damage. As well, we also get resistance to fire damage, which is pretty useful by spending a sorcery point, which is pretty useful at various points in the game. We're also going to go ahead and replace a spell, and at this point I think you will just not really need the versatility of Chromatic Orb, so we can replace that with Fireball, giving us access to a massive AoE damage burst that's even better for this character than for other characters, thanks to our Elemental Affinity. At Sorcerer level 7, we get to take yet another fire spell, and that is Wall of Fire. Wall of Fire is incredibly powerful for this character because it, again, does even more damage, and every turn it's going to do the fire damage over again. But also because one of the play patterns for this party is going to be initiating combat from stealth with Wall of Fire, which surprises a bunch of enemies. We'll then get additional attacks with our assassin character, and we will be able to have the Wall of Fire do multiple damage instances because the enemies will be surprised and stuck in it. Since we now have Wall of Fire to concentrate on for AoE damage, we can safely swap out Cloud of Daggers. We no longer really need it at this point, and instead of Cloud of Daggers, we're going to go ahead and grab Haste. Haste gives us the option to twin Haste in fights where we don't have the fire damage, or where fire damage isn't good for whatever reason. Maybe there's a bunch of explosives in the area, so you're nervous about slinging around fire damage, or maybe an enemy is immune. Against resistant enemies, we will be able to use Arsonist's Oil to turn that to apply vulnerability, so we will not have to worry about resistant enemies, but immune enemies you need to have some other options, and Haste is a good one for this character. And being able to twin cast Haste on your party, of course, is excellent, giving you a tremendous amount of support as well as the tremendous amount of damage that we are able to dish out with our fire spells. At Sorcerer level 8, we get access to another feat, and even though Charisma is super important for this character, I'm going to recommend that we take Alert here. Going first on this character is really important because we want to be clearing out the large groups of enemies before they can act, and we always want to be winning initiative, even against surprised enemies, and if we start a fight from stealth with Wall of Fire, enemies will be surprised, but then you want to win initiative, because then you get 2 full turns of actions before they ever get a turn, which, given the high damage of this party, means you will always be able to kill them. It is slightly less important to have initiative on this character than on other characters, so if you really want more damage, then you can go ahead and just take +2 Charisma at this stage, but the bonus to initiative, I think, is just too important to pass up, so we're going to grab Alert at this level. We're also going to pick up Greater Invisibility, which gives us a whole extra available play pattern. We will have a Stealth Archer as our third character, and so this means that you can use Greater Invisibility on that character to get a couple free shots before combat starts, and start wearing down enemies before you ever even have to engage in combat at all. This character can concentrate on the Greater Invisibility, which gives you a bunch of additional options for how you approach combats, and you can get 5 or 6 attacks before combat starts very safely with the very high stealth checks that we'll be capable of making, and then so you can use Greater Invisibility to win combats before they ever start. I think that's more important than the control spells, although of course the normal control spells are always good at this point. I mean, Sleet Storm, Confusion, Hypnotic Pattern, Fear, these are all excellent spells that you could definitely grab, but this party is really, really focused on damage, and Greater Invisibility helps with that. As well, having access to an invisibility option, Greater Invisibility is more expensive, but does just the same, is useful for some out-of-combat scenarios where you want to sneak into various locations without actually triggering any enemy attention. At character level 9, we get access to 5th level spells, and there's one in particular that is incredibly useful for us. That is Hold Monster. Now, this does require a specific story choice to be as optimal as possible, and that's killing the strange ox during Act 2 for the Hat of Fire Acuity, because if you can stack up Fire Acuity, which you can do very easily with Scorching Ray, then you can guaranteed land Hold Monster, which then guarantees that the rest of your party, as well as any future Scorching Rays that you want to land, get critical hits. You can especially easily do this with Quicken Spells and so on because you're a Sorcerer. Now, it's not required, and Hold Monster will still land pretty reliably because this is our only character that is going to need any spell DC items at all. So this character gets to absorb every spell DC item you find. Your save DCs will be incredibly high regardless of whether you're abusing Acuity or not. But if you did take that story choice and do have the Hat of Fire Acuity as early as Act 2, then you can start abusing Hold Monster early. If you didn't, then you'll get it in Act 3 and can start abusing it at that point, in which case you are going to be able to land Hold Monsters on basically every enemy in the game, giving them the strongest crowd control effect, and then guaranteeing that you will be able to land critical damage from the rest of your party, which is, of course, incredibly powerful. We don't need to replace any spells because our spell list is already perfect at this point, so we are just going to go up to level 10. And at character level 10, we get to take another cantrip, and since this is the only place we can possibly fit it in this party, it would be remiss of me not to suggest that we take True Strike to annoy people in the YouTube comments. Finally, we are going to take another leveled spell. At this point, we can go back for one of the utility spells that we are missing. Something like Enhanced Leap could still be useful at this stage if we don't have it from somewhere else, or getting access to one of the crowd control spells. Daylight can be used for certain late game encounters and will be very useful in those. There's honestly not that many spells that we really need at this point, so depending on what you feel like your party is missing in terms of utility, you're going to go back and grab something that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. And so I'm going to say, I don't know, we'll take Daylight in order to win the fight that this is very good in, but you could also grab Banishment for enemies that that's good against, or just any utility spell that you feel like you're missing and haven't found enough scrolls or potions of, for example. For our meta magic here, we can go ahead and take Heightened Spell, because this gives enemies disadvantage on saving throws, and so this can let us land Hold Monster even more reliably, even though this is currently our only crowd control spell, although we could have also taken something like Hypnotic Pattern, which is very good with Heightened Spell as well. Heightened Spell is still just so excellent that I definitely recommend picking it up. And at Sorcerer level 11, we get access to Permanent Flight, which obviously is incredible for this character. Means we will always be positioned exactly where we want to be, which is awesome. And, of course, we also get 6th level spells, and the 6th level spell that we are going to take is going to be Globe of Invulnerability. This gives us a whole other dimension to our party. We have a lot of ranged damage, and this gives us a very safe place to retreat to in the circumstance where we have any enemies alive on the field that we need to retreat from. So Globe of Invulnerability is just a mainstay of every party, and I definitely recommend having it. There's a lot of encounters in which it's going to be just instantly game-winning, and so you absolutely want this somewhere in your party. This is part of why we took a Sorcerer, is to get access to Counterspell and Haste and Globe of Invulnerability and other important utility spells that we wouldn't otherwise have had. Finally, at level 12, we max out our Charisma, and we get to take an additional spell, and the spell that we're going to take here is Disintegrate. Disintegrate is just really good against a specific late-game enemy, and so we are going to pick that one up, which I won't spoil in this video, but you will definitely want it against an enemy that has very low dexterity save and high other saves, and just doing a lot of damage to them can be very helpful, especially because there are ways in which some enemies can resist attacks in the late game. For items for this character, we are really just going to grab anything that increases our spell save DC, and there's 2 specific hats that are really good for us as well. The Pyro Quickness hat, and of course the Hat of Fire Acuity. Normally you're just going to use Fire Acuity on this character because it's just so strong. You're going to be using leveled up Scorching Rays in order to deal 7 Scorching Ray attacks, which stacks your Fire Acuity up to 14, meaning that your it stacks your Fire Acuity up to maximum, meaning that your attacks will always hit, and that your save DCs will be incredibly difficult to resist. And the Pyro Quickness hat is going to be an additional option because you can cast 3 Quicken spells per turn. This could let you, in theory, use a 6th level Scorching Ray and 2 5th level Scorching Rays with Quickened because of the Pyro Quickness hat giving you an additional bonus action. You take a lot of damage when you cast Pyro Quickness because the burn damage happens for each instance of Scorching Ray, but as was pointed out in the comments of my previous Fire Sorcerer video, so thank you to the person who pointed this out, if you're wet, you're immune to burning. So if you take a shower before casting a spell, then you can use the Pyro Quickness hat totally safely because you'll get the bonus effect, but you won't burn yourself. So those are two options. And then, of course, this character, like every Sorcerer, is the best character in the game at using Marka Heshkir, and we have all the fire synergies, so we want to be using Marka Heshkir in the late game. Other than that, we're just looking for anything that increases our spell save DC or increases our initiative, because this character gets to absorb all of the spell save DC items that our party happens to find, since it's the only character that really has saving throw spells at all. And then any initiative, of course, is just very good for every spellcaster, especially AoE damage spellcasters. Alright, that's build number 2. Let's go to build number 3. Our third character is going to be a stealth archer, because not only does that play very well into our theme of dealing as much damage as possible in the opening round of combat and deleting every enemy before they get to go — this character is basically the best in the game at doing that — it also gives us a lot of utility and synergy with the rest of our party, thanks to the special arrows or coded arrows being able to apply effects that we very much want. Arrows of Darkness will be very good for our fourth party member, whose build is upcoming, and arrows coated in Arsonist's Oil can let our Fire Sorcerer damage even fire-immune enemies or fire-resistant enemies very easily. So this character not only pulls its weight by deleting enemies before they get to go, and being one of the best ways to stop enemies from ever getting turns because of the incredibly high initiative and incredibly high damage that we're going to have, especially in the late game, it also adds a lot of dimensions to our party in terms of utility access that we wouldn't otherwise get. So I think this build fits very well into this party as a whole. We're going to start with a rogue level because this also gets to be our skill user at this point, and this is going to be our Gloves of Dexterity user. So this character is going to dump dex once we get the Gloves of Dexterity. That means that we're going to have two different stat splits depending on whether we've found the gloves or not yet. So in the early game, we're going to go with high dexterity, because of course we need that for landing our arrows, as well as constitution. We're going to take 12 strength to give us a little bit of jump distance and carry weight, and we'll take 14 wisdom. And then once we have the Gloves of Dexterity, we're going to drop this dexterity and put our bonus in wisdom, because we don't need the dex anymore at all. Go up to 14 strength, which actually is pretty nice for this character. Just the jump distance is very good for all ranged characters, getting you to places you wouldn't otherwise be able to get to. And with our remaining 4 points, we can just stick those in intelligence because it maximizes our skills. The last 4 points aren't that useful, but overall, we just get to replace our dexterity with the gloves, which gives us more feats on this character than we would have otherwise, which is something that's awesome. These archetypes can struggle a little bit with access to feats because they want to take a lot of levels in a lot of different classes, and so the Gloves of Dexterity let us replace that with an item and still have the maximum benefit of our character. For our skill selection here, we get to start the game with expertise in sleight of hand and stealth, which is awesome. Obviously, it means you won't have to worry about lockpicking because you just have a rogue doing that perfectly. And then our remaining 2 skill points we can put kind of wherever. We don't need the dialogue skills, but just having high athletics and can be useful sometimes. You can sneak up on an enemy and push them off a cliff. Mostly you're here just for the sleight of hand and stealth checks, though. At level 2, we're going to branch out and we're going to take our Ranger levels next, because Ranger gives us access to a much more reliable character than increasing our Rogue levels. So I value getting our Ranger levels early. We take Rogue for the skill points, of course, but then we want to get our Ranger levels high as soon as possible to give us access to more consistent damage and more accurate damage thanks to archery fighting style. This way our character can do sustained damage rather than leaning entirely into early game burst damage, something that this party already excels at, so we get access to a lot more power by going for our Ranger levels early. We're going to go ahead and take Bounty Hunter here, because it's the only one that has any relevant bonus at all. The disadvantage from Ensnaring Strike is actually fairly relevant, at least in sort of the mid-game, and none of these other abilities really matter that much. And then we're going to take Wasteland Wanderer Fire. You could take Beast Tamer if you want the familiar up until you get the special familiar, or if you are not intending to get the special familiar, but the fire resistance makes this character surprisingly tanky, so it's actually pretty good to do that. And then no other decisions at Ranger level 2, or Ranger level 1, so let's level up. At level 2, we get our fighting style. We'll take archery fighting style, of course, because we're an archer, so that makes our attacks land vastly more reliably. One of the great reasons to be an archer in this game is this plus the high ground advantage means that you'll always land your attacks extremely reliably, and it's also very easy to fight from stealth. And then for our spell selection here, even though we took Bounty Hunter, we're not going to take Ensnaring Strike at this point because our party doesn't otherwise have access to Longstrider, so we absolutely need that, and this means that we now have one of the most powerful effects in the game. One of the reasons to take a Ranger on this character in general, in this party in general, is for the utility that Longstrider brings you, and then we're going to grab Hunter's Mark for the consistent damage at this early stage of the game. At Ranger level 3, we are going to take Gloomstalker Ranger, because this increases our initiative and gives us the additional attack, with 16 dexterity, because we won't have the gloves yet, and plus 3 initiative from Dread Ambusher. We'll go first basically all the time, as well as doing a lot of extra damage, and we get the bonus action Hide, which is awesome for this character, because we'll now always be attacking from advantage. We could get that from Rogue later on, but still, it's just so nice to have this early on, and then Umbral Shroud doesn't come up that much, but is okay when you want to use it. For our spell selection here, now we'll take Ensnaring Strike, because the disadvantage makes this actually pretty good, even with relatively low wisdom. You can ensnare some enemies. And then at Ranger level 4, we get access to our feat. Our feat that we are going to take is Sharpshooter. We'll always be attacking with advantage. We have archery fighting style. We can land Sharpshooter incredibly reliably, so our burst damage will be second to none at this stage of the game. Although the monk will eclipse us briefly, at least until we get our assassin levels online. But between those two characters, you will have tons of damage at this point in the game already, doing somewhere around the mid-100s on your opening rounds of combat with the Sharpshooter and the Ranger, which is obviously going to be an incredible amount of damage in the early stage of the game. Then we take Ranger level 5 to get extra attack, so we can apply that Sharpshooter damage even more often, as well as Misty Step, which is amazing. Of course, every character wants access to this, so we're looking to get this on multiple characters, and now this saves our Misty Step items for the characters that otherwise don't have it, because we get this from our Gloomstalker levels. For our spell, if you just want a good generic spell, you can take Spike Growth. Even without any DC, there's no save DC associated with the spell, it just wins some combats on its own. But if you want to abuse greater invisibility, then you can take Pass Without Trace, and this character allows you therefore to access one of the most broken mechanics in the game, the fighting without entering combat that greater invisibility gives you, with an extremely reliable stealth check. With your high dexterity, expertise in stealth, Pass Without Trace, starting next level, or at level 8, depending on when you take greater invisibility, you can be just killing most enemies before combat is even engaged in, if you want to abuse that game mechanic, and this character is the best at doing that, so this party uses that incredibly well. This gives you a whole other dimension of your play, where you can take like 4 or 5 up to maybe 10 attacks, depending on your rolls, before enemies actually even know you're there, which is enough to kill most encounters before they ever start. Next level, we are going to go back into our rogue levels, because we want to hit Assassin as soon as possible. This will let us take an extra action at the beginning of combat, because you'll be able to act outside of combat while in stealth, and then refresh that action and use it again at the beginning of combat. So you'll get Action Surge basically every turn. As well, the bonus action dashes and disengages are pretty nice for this character, giving you a lot of mobility. You can now escape fights very easily if things go wrong for level 2 rogue, but mostly, of course, we are here for Assassin, because at level 3 Rogue, we get to have guaranteed critical hits against surprised enemies, which is a massive increase to our damage, as well as refreshing our action, letting us take 2 attacks outside of combat from stealth, and then 2 more attacks at the beginning of combat. This means that plus our Gloomstalker attack, we are doing 5 attacks in the opening round, all of which are Sharpshooter, all of which are critical hits, so that's going to be a tremendous amount of damage, and we'll have advantage on any enemy that hasn't gone yet, which, thanks to our very high initiative from Gloomstalker, should be just about every enemy. But of course, it can get even better because we can now multi-class to power up the build even further, and we're going to go ahead and take a level of Fighter here. Fighter gets us a fighting style for defense. Obviously, we don't really need any of these melee-focused fighting styles, but defense fighting style is nice. Just the additional AC means this character is quite tanky. But mostly, of course, we are here in Fighter for the second level, where we get access to Action Surge. Action Surge is the most powerful ability in the game, and is going to take our number of attacks in the opening round of combat from 5 up to 7, which is all of which are going to be critical hits, all of which are going to be doing massive damage, and so that means that our burst damage is going to be second to none. We also get to use this sparingly, depending on whether we actually need the burst damage. It is a short rest cooldown, but you can decide whether or not you use it. You don't have to use it in the opening round of combat, so because this character has so many passive bonuses to damage, but you can if you need more damage to kill an enemy. Between these effects, you can now kill basically any enemy in the entire game in a single round of shots from this character, leaving the rest of your party to either finish off a weakened enemy or just have to burst down the remaining few foes, the remaining weaker foes. And of course, because you have the Fire Sorcerer and the Monk, if there's a boss that lives through this character's volley, then they will be able to take care of that character without that enemy without any problems at all. At Fighter level 3, we are going to take Battle Master, because the maneuvers multiply, the damage from the maneuvers multiplies with our guaranteed critical hits for even more damage, and the maneuvers also give us a lot of additional utility for this character. I do always get the question whenever I build a character in this archetype of why we don't take Champion, because of course critical hits are really good for sneak attack and multiplying damage and so on, but the math on Champion works out to just significantly less damage than Battle Master overall. Battle Master maneuvers increase your damage more than the passive critical hit chance of Champion. We have 4 maneuvers, each of which is worth at minimum a d4 of damage, so you get quite a lot of additional damage from those. You need to make something like 20 Champion attacks before it even catches up to the damage of Battle Master, and you're getting the utility of Battle Master. But that's also not even counting the massive bonus that Precision Attack gives you, because we're a sharpshooter build, we've got critical hits, so we want to land those. Also, because we're guaranteeing critical hits, the crit chance is somewhat wasted on this character, although still obviously very good for us, so Battle Master just wins out over Champion. If you really want to make this character as independent of resting as possible, Champion certainly isn't much worse, or you just like critical hits, but Battle Master is overall going to be a little stronger. We're going to take Precision Attack here, and then we are going to take Menacing Attack, which can let us lock down melee enemies by fearing them at range, frightening them at range so they can't move. And then we are going to go ahead and take Trip Attack, because we can set up advantage for the rest of our party members using Trip Attack. This character will often be your first character to actually take its turn in combat. You'll start combat with other characters, then use this character in stealth, and then it will get rolled into initiative, and you'll take your remaining turns, your remaining actions first with this character of the 4 party members. So this character can set up your other characters with special arrows to apply Arsonist Oil or Trip Attack, stuff like that. It's great to have those options on this character. This character, of course, will also always win initiative, because at the next level, we are going to take another level of Fighter, and we are going to go ahead and grab Alert. This gives us a plus 12 bonus to initiative, 4 from the Gloves of Dexterity, which has 18, then 5 from this for 9, plus 3 from Gloomstalker is plus 12 to initiative. Even without any initiative gear, there's almost no enemies in the game that can theoretically beat that. Initiative is rolled on a d4 in Baldur's Gate 3, so the maximum variance is 3. And almost no enemies can theoretically beat a plus 12. If you put even 1 point of initiative gear on this, I think there are no enemies in the game that can beat this character in initiative rolls. And so you'll always go first, never get surprised, and that is an incredibly powerful effect for a character that wants to be assassinating enemies before they ever go. For gear for this character, There's really not that much that we need specifically for this character, although there is, of course, one item that is required to make the character function, and that's the Gloves of Dexterity. You're going to want that, and you're going to want the best bow that you can find. This character also does use critical hit gear very well. I suggest for your bow that you want the dead shot, usually, because that prevents you from having to use strength elixirs to maximize the Titan String, although you could do the Titan String plus the Club of Hill Giant Strength if you want to do that and don't want to have two characters using elixirs. But the dead shot gives you the bonus to hit, which is very valuable for a sharpshooter character, as well as increasing your critical hit chance to increase your damage overall. So this, I think, is best in slot for your bow. Really, though, you only need just the best bow that you have, and the Gloves of Dexterity to make this character function. Anything that adds damage dice will work very well. Those will be multiplied by critical hits, so stuff like anything that adds a d4 of damage to your weapon attacks will be very valuable as well if you find any of those items for your character. But this character is extremely item independent, so all you really, other than the Gloves of Dexterity, all you need is to make sure that you have those and a good bow, and you're all set. Alright, let's go on to the next build. For our fourth character, there's honestly a lot of different directions we could take this party. You basically just want a core to build the rest of the party around, and I mean that from a tactical sense. The monk is sort of the strategic core of this party, which we're building the rest of the party to enable, and from a tactical sense, we want a character that anchors the party, that the rest of the party can physically play around or behind without putting that character in danger. That could be a light cleric, it could be a moon druid, it could be a battlemaster fighter. There's a lot of different options that can fill that role, but I think that the strongest and the one that works the best for this party is going to be a Lockadin. A multi-class paladin and warlock is an incredibly powerful character with one major disadvantage in most parties, which is that it doesn't fully come online until level 5, and really wants to hit level 7 to hit its maximum power spike. So a lot of parties just can't support that character. Even though it's still good in the early game, don't get me wrong, it will be slightly behind until it's hit its major power spikes at level 5 and at level 7. This party's so early game focused that we can bring this character and it will be a major contributor to the party, and what it gives us is an incredibly solid anchor point to build the rest of our party around, defending them, providing a lot of the utility that we're missing, as well as a bunch of the most broken possible options in the game. And so I definitely think that having the paladin available for our character is going to be really important, and it increases the power of our party significantly to have that character present, as well as we can use darkness and devil sight abuse to give us a safe bubble to fall back to. So this is my recommendation, although I do want to note that this is a pretty flexible spot and you can fill it with a lot of different characters successfully. For our subclass, we are actually going to go with a subclass I do not usually recommend, and that is the Oath of Devotion. And the reason for this is that Oath of Devotion Paladin gets access to Sanctuary. We don't really care about our Paladin subclass, other than getting Sanctuary, because we just want to have the smite, the damage from smites, and we want command. So Oath of Devotion gets both of those things and doesn't cost us anything to take, because a lot of our power is going to come from our warlock levels. For our ability score spread, we are going to go with a charisma focus spread. Since this is going to be a blade lock build, we'll be using our charisma both for spellcasting and for attacks, so we can just take as much charisma as possible. That means we can drop our strength to minimum, take 14 dexterity, 16 Constitution and 16 Charisma, as well as 12 Wisdom, so we get a nice clean attribute spread. If you're using this as your main character, then you can take a strength focus build just for the ship, but by the time you're level 2 on this build, you'll be using Eldritch Blasts, so you won't need to have the strength focus build. We can just take this stat split. There's no particularly important skills for this build. We already have dialogue skills elsewhere, so just take whatever you think your party might need, and that's level 1. Let's go to level 2. At level 2, we're going to go ahead and take a Warlock level, which is really important, of course, for this character. We need to hit our level 3 Warlock as soon as possible. And since we're going to be getting command from Paladin, we're going to go ahead and take Great Old One Warlock on this build. This gets us the Mortal Reminder Fears. We'll be critically hitting reasonably often, and this gives us just a bunch of additional options. You could take Fiend and then respec into Great Old One at level 5 so that you have command for the early game. It can definitely be very helpful in the early game, but honestly, Dissonant Whispers will be just as good as command for the early game, so we'll just take Great Old One Warlock and use that. Mortal Reminder just gives us some passive crowd control, which is really nice for this character, so that just adds another option for our build. And for our cantrip selection, of course, we are taking Eldritch Blast, and then we're going to take Blade Ward. This will be our tank, such as it is. It's not going to be tanking a lot, because enemies will mostly be dead before they act, but there will be some circumstances where your melee character gets into range of enemies, and you need to take some damage, so Blade Ward helps with that. And of course, we'll have Armor of Agathis later on. Blade Ward can multiply the HP of that. For our spell selection, we are going to take Dissonant Whisper and Hex, because that gives us the option to crowd control enemies and, of course, more damage to go with our Eldritch Blasts in the early game. And then we are going to go to level 3. And just like every Warlock before us in the history of time, at Warlock level 2, we are taking Agonizing Blast and Devil's Sight. Devil's Sight is, of course, extremely broken with Darkness, and that gives us yet another broken potential for this party build. With Darkness and Devil's Sight, combos extremely well with Arrows of Darkness from our Archer, and can be used to lock down specific enemies in melee with us by putting darkness on them. Also will let us see through our Hungers of Hadar later on. So all of that makes Devil's Sight just incredibly powerful for this character. It's also worth considering if you're building this as a custom character, playing a Drow or half-Drow for additional casts of darkness just to take advantage of this. And then we take Agonizing Blast to increase our Eldritch Blast damage, so we have a solid ranged option in addition to our powerful melee attacks later on. For our spell selection at this level, we're going to grab Armor of Agathis, because that's just going to be one we will want for the entire game. And then we're going to go to Warlock level 3, where we get to take Pact of the Blade Warlock. The only thing that's missing from this build, this party build, incidentally, the only thing that I think is really important to have that we don't have somewhere in the party is Guidance, which we could get from Pact of the Tome, but obviously we need Blade in order to attack with our Charisma. So you'll just want to find the Guidance amulet in order to have Guidance available to your party. Then for our spell selection, of course, we are taking Darkness. Even though you can use Arrows of Darkness, you always want Casts of Darkness available on your Warlock, because it is just so powerful and gives your party a safe place to fall back to against enemy ranged attacks, locks down enemy characters in melee with you, and is just one of the most powerful things you can be doing in Baldur's Gate in general. At this next level, we get to take another level of Paladin, which gets us access to Smites. Obviously, that increases our damage massively, and so this character is now able to output incredible damage, both at range and in melee, thanks to using its Charisma for every stat, having Eldritch Blast available at range, and the Smite damage available in melee, which increases our damage exponentially. We have our Warlock spell slots, which we can spend on Smites every short rest, so that increases our damage output significantly, just increasing the damage of this character overall massively. We also get access to all the Paladin spells, which for this party are actually really important, and we are going to sometimes use our spell slots not on Smites, but instead on spells. Having Bless and having Command are both really good for this character, so we're definitely going to want to pick those up. We don't yet have Sanctuary, but we'll want that as well, because that will be a very important tool, especially for fights where our Sorcerer is concentrating on Twinned Haste. We're going to want Sanctuary available in the party. So that's why I recommend Oath of Devotion Paladin for this build, because this character will actually be casting your spells, sometimes casting its spells. Bless is especially good for the Archer, because you're going to be using sharpshooter attacks, so having Bless on that character means that they will be hitting much more reliably, and that multiplies your damage significantly. So the utility that we get from Paladin, in addition to the damage, is actually quite significant. For our fighting style here, we're going to go with Great Weapon Fighting, because it multiplies our Smite damage, which obviously is awesome. And for our prepared spell list, we're just going to make sure that we have Command and Bless. Those are the two most important ones. Probably want Thunderous Smite, because that's always good. And then you can just kind of take whatever for the last ones. It really doesn't matter what the other ones here are. At this next level, we are going to level up in Warlock again, because we do want to increase our feats, and we want to get access to the very powerful Warlock level 3 spells, as well as extra attack. So we're going to go ahead and grab a cantrip. We can take a utility cantrip. Since we didn't pick up Bone Chill from our Sorcerer levels, we can grab that here. Going into level 6 is around when you're going into Act 2, so it's useful against the undead there. For our spell selection, we're going to want Misty Step for sure. Very important to grab that. And then for our feat, we're just going to go ahead and take an ability improvement and bump our charisma up. And then at Warlock level 5, we get extra attack with our Blade-Packed weapons, so we are now able to smite many times per turn and do as much damage as possible given our very high level spell slots available for smiting. Since we're a Warlock, we'll have many of those per day, but also we get very powerful Warlock spells like Hunger of Hadar, and we can now swap out Hex, which we're no longer likely to concentrate on since we'll be using Hunger of Hadar or Darkness in every fight, and we can swap that out for Counterspell, giving us a second copy of Counterspell, which is just really useful to have in a party. For our Eldritch Invocation here, we'll take Repelling Blast, which gives us a little more control over enemy movement, which is always awesome. So we get to increase the power level of our party significantly. Now, did this not take? Yeah, the Hex didn't take. We're replacing Hex with Counterspell. There we go. And then at this next level, we're going to go back for our third Paladin level to pick up Sanctuary. We are now at the point where we are very likely to end up in a situation where we have to concentrate on haste on our Sorcerer, because we're going to fight some fire immune enemies at various points in the game at this point, so having Sanctuary is very helpful. Also just a really useful panic button if something goes wrong, and so you don't have to take Oath of Devotion Paladin, but it is kind of fun that we get to use it here in a way that really matters, and Sanctuary is just too good to leave at home. We also get access to Sacred Weapon, which lets us increase our chance to hit significantly. Since we'll be attacking with advantage a lot of the time, this is a pretty big boost to our chance to hit, so our smite attacks will pretty much always land, which is of course excellent as well. And then we can unprepare spells and re-prepare some more spells, although it really doesn't matter what we have prepared as long as we have Command, Sanctuary, and Bless prepared. Bless at this stage in the game has started to fall off, but is still pretty useful. Then we're going back for our Warlock levels, although I will note that if you're playing this party build on Tactician or below, if you're not on Honor mode, the Paladin extra attack and the Warlock extra attack stack, so you'd want to just get 2 more Paladin levels to get your third attack per round. On Honor mode, we're just going to go for level 9 Warlock so that we can maximize the spell slots that we're using for smites, as well as get access to just the very powerful Warlock's late game spells. It increases our damage as well. Entropic Ward from Great Old One Warlock is a nice defensive ability which we shouldn't ever need, but does give us a little bit of additional boost in those circumstances. And then we can pick up a utility spell, or we can pick up Hold Person. This character will be able to abuse the Helmet of Arcane Acuity and the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel very well, because we're making multiple attacks per turn with our weapon, and so we can then use Hold Person, because it's an enchantment spell, or Command, because that's also an enchantment spell, as a bonus action with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, adding in another one of the most broken effects in the game. You'll have extremely high save DCs with Arcane Acuity, or just generally decent save DCs because of our charisma, though Arcane Acuity lets you really take this character to the next level as because of the amount that it increases your save DCs. Because of the amount that it makes your save DCs impossible to resist. I don't know why I just stumbled over my words there. Alright, at Warlock level 7, we get access to 4th level spells, and so we can start taking some of the lockdown spells that aren't available otherwise to this character. We can bonus action cast Hypnotic Pattern because it's an illusion, aren't available to this party. We can bonus action cast Hypnotic Pattern because it's an illusion spell, which is pretty nice. We could pick up Invisibility just as some utility. Most of our spell slots are going to be used for smites, so it's not something that we're going to be doing that often, but it is definitely nice to be able to have these spells available when you want them. We could also take Evard's Black Tentacles, which you can stack on top of Wall of Fire from your Sorcerer to lock enemies in place. Generally, you won't need to do that because enemies will be dead before the first round of combat is over, so they won't be able to move anyways, but that is also an available option that can power up your power up your party for longer fights. For our Eldritch Invocation here, we are going to go with Slow, because that is typically the one that is most useful here. You could also take Confusion, but I think that Slow against some bosses is very good, and we just don't need Confusion. We've got a lot of utility from Command and so on, but the fact that Confusion is an enchantment spell does mean that we can bonus action cast it with the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel, so there is an option to use that as well. I think that Slow gives you a little more utility overall. Reducing enemy AC is also pretty relevant, so while Slow I don't think is typically the strongest spell, when you are building for a specific party, sometimes you're going to make choices that are different than what you would make building a build in isolation, which is why I like making these videos. Then at Warlock 8 we get another feat, and we are going to take an ability improvement here to bring our charisma to 20, and we can take another spell, and I'm just going to go ahead and grab Banishment. This gives us the option to take out enemies with low charisma saves pretty easily, so that's pretty powerful. Although at this point you're really just looking for utility spells that you think you might need, because your main combat spells are going to be Smites or Command. Finally, at level 12, we do have a choice. You can either get a feat, and if you do, you'll just take a level of Paladin and grab Alert, or you can pick up Savage Attacker if you feel like you don't need the initiative. Savage Attacker will increase your damage significantly, or Great Weapon Fighter if you found your Great Weapon Master if you found you're mostly using a two-handed weapon. You do also have the option to use this character as a sword and shield character, so either of those will work depending on which fighting style you wanted to select and how you want to build this character. This character is very flexible in terms of gear because you're using a packed weapon, so whatever weapon you have available that's the best at that point in the game is the one that you can use. And you're going to swap your weapons and your fighting style as a result of what items you have depending on what level you are and as you're traveling through the game. In general, Savage Attacker is going to be the biggest boost to your damage if you're taking a feat, but if you just want to boost your damage, I think that you'd rather honestly just get 5th level Warlock spell slots, because the 5th level Warlock spells get you access to Hold Monster, which is extremely powerful, but most importantly the Eldritch Invocation for Conjure Elemental, which can help boost the party significantly. The elementals can give you a lot of additional utility for your party, as well as being a summon this party doesn't otherwise have access to, so that can distract enemies, pull enemies to certain areas. I think that that is better and will be more damage in general than taking Savage Attacker would, but I do think that Alert is always worth considering. If you're finding that this character is falling behind on initiative, then definitely consider grabbing Alert earlier on in the build, or even earlier on in the build, but you can also just pick it up at level 12 to make sure that you're going before the enemies. However, I think that picking up Hold Monster, so you can bonus action cast Hold Monster, and now you have 2 Arcane Acuitied Hold Monsters available in your party, as well as the ability to bonus action cast that, and you get Conjure Elemental, which is just another extremely powerful thing. This character just adds so many more broken elements to the build, to the party, that I think it really comes together as you level up. You get Sanctuary, you get Summons, you get Arcane Acuity Abuse, you get Command, you get Darkness, so you're just adding so many more factors to the party that makes it an even bigger threat, though again, you could replace this build with some others, I think, and still perform very well. For items for this character, we are looking at... Oh, getting some lag here. For items for this character, we are going to be looking at really just the Helm of Arcane Acuity and whatever the best heavy armor you have is. You want the Helmet of Arcane Acuity, the Band of the Mystic Scoundrel to abuse Command as much as possible, the best heavy armor, and then you're going to take either a solid Great Weapon, whatever two-handed weapon you find that does the most damage, or a one-handed weapon and shield if you want to have higher armor class. Either of those are very solid ways to build the character, and I suspect that and I think that in most circumstances, if you're playing optimally, your character is going to swap what weapon set they're using based on what weapon sets and shields and so on you have available. I think you'll probably spend more time as sword and board than as great weapons, but both will show up during the build. Another item that's really good for this character is the Birthright Hat, increasing your charisma up to 22. That just increases your chance to hit and increases your damage. Just very good for this character. And you won't be able to use the mirror on both this character and the Sorcerer, so having Birthright on one of them is really nice. Normally Birthright doesn't see use because you can use the mirror to get more. It doesn't stack with the charisma from the mirror, but since you have two charisma characters in this party, Birthright is going to be very good, but if that's only if you don't want to abuse the Helmet of Arcane Acuity. Some other items that are great for this character are anything that can guarantee critical hits, like the Killer's Sweetheart, because then you can guarantee critical smites, and the Ring of Arcane Synergy lets you stack Arcane Synergy when you damage enemies with a cantrip, which increases your weapon damage after that. Now, this is really awesome because you can stack this up quite a lot with Eldritch Blast. It's 3 damage instances, so it's 3 triggers of Arcane Synergy, and you can fire an Eldritch Blast with a haste action. So if you are hasted, you can use an Eldritch Blast for full value, so you would only be getting 1 attack, but you can get an Eldritch Blast for 3 attacks, stack up Arcane Synergy, and then make weapon attacks, and then with your bonus action, cast a Band of the Mystic Scoundrel spell, so you can stack Arcane Acuity, Arcane Synergy all together, doing smites, doing massive damage with your weapon attacks, and having extremely high DC control effects. So this character synergizes very well with the haste from your party members as well, because you maximize the use of haste thanks to the ability to make ranged attacks with Eldritch Blast. Even without haste, you can still stack up Arcane Synergy quite a lot just by having the first turn of combat be using an Eldritch Blast, so you get a lot of value out of that as well. Alright, my friends, I hope that you have enjoyed this look at this damage-focused party. This is, I think, one of the best ways to just kill all the enemies before they go. This party is going to average, I think, something like 1,000 damage in the opening round of combat without trying very hard, and if you are trying very hard, you can pretty easily reach 2,000 damage, which is enough to win just about any encounter without any trouble. So this party does plenty of damage and has quite a lot of utility, defensive support as well. Almost every fight you're going to start off by doing a tremendous amount of burst damage and killing every important enemy in the encounter, and so this party should get you through honor mode with very little risk to yourself, because the enemies will never get to take a turn, so there's no risk when they never get to take a turn. As always, if you have enjoyed this video, of course, feel free to leave a comment. I really do appreciate it when people leave the comments. I read every comment that I get. I get too many to answer them all, although I wish I could still do that, but I do still read them all and really appreciate you taking the time to leave comments. And of course, if you like the video, that helps me out with the algorithm, and you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 builds and other strategy game content. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.